Good evening and welcome to A Message of Hope. A Message of Hope is brought to you by the 70 West Church of Christ, and I am thankful unto you that you have decided to study the Bible with me tonight. We find ourselves in Matthew chapter 23 as we're looking at why or how we can avoid being a hypocrite. Notice first on Friday we noticed that we had to know God's Word. And last night we noticed the idea that we have to show God's Word. So let's go to Matthew chapter 23 here in a moment, and we'll pick up. And let's see, we're going to look at verses number 25, 26, 27, about 25 through 29 tonight. And we're going to look at how we can avoid being a hypocrite. If you'll go right down here below us and click on like and share, that will allow this broadcast to go out onto your news feed and will give us an opportunity to speak to those who we may not have on our news feed, and we would find ourselves very lucky to be able to do that. Remember truth.fm, and as you go and download that app, don't forget the dot. Truth.fm is a downloadable app on your smartphone that will allow you to have 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week access to gospel preaching, gospel Bible classes, gospel singing, and you look for Hot Springs Christian Radio, and you'll find it right in that app, and we would love to be a part of that. Remember the numbers 7 and 9, 7 a.m., manna in the morning, 9 a.m., 2 minutes that will change your life. Of course, here at 7 p.m. you'll find Message of Hope, and at 9 p.m. you'll find Bible Investigation. October 23rd through the 25th, Blaze 2020. Go to hotsprings.churchofchrist.org and register. This is a weekend for teens and college-age kids, and it will be a fantastic weekend. You do not want to miss out. Be a part of that. William Shakespeare, seen as one of the greatest literary writers of our time, writes this: all the world's a stage, all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. We want to avoid wearing two masks. When it comes to our religious life, when it comes to our life in general, we want to avoid being the one who will change and put on a new mask as the situation changes. We want to be the same type of people we are all of the time. Matthew chapter 23, verses 25 through 29, speaks to that idea effectively. In verses number 1 through 4, we find out that a man is going to have to know God's Word. In verses 15 and 23, we find out a man's going to have to show God's Word. Well, here we find out that God's Word is going to have to be a part of us. We're going to have to know God's Word. I mean, know it. It's going to have to sort of just seep out of us. It's going to have to be a part of us. Notice what's mentioned in verse number 25. Woe unto you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites, for you make clean the outside of the cup and of the platter, but within they're full of extortion and excess. You blind Pharisee, clean up first that which is in the inside of the cup and the platter, and the outside of them may be cleaned also. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees and hypocrites, for you are like unto whitened sepulchres, which indeed appear beautiful outward, but are within full of dead men's bones, and all uncleanliness. Even so you outwardly appear righteous unto men, but within you're full of hypocrisy and iniquity. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you build tombs of the prophets and garnish the sepulchres with righteousness, and say, if we had been in the days of our fathers, we would not have been partakers with them in the blood of the prophets. Oh, well, watch out. Let's start in verse number 25 as we look at the idea that Jesus is giving them here about being hypocrites. I had a vehicle that I shared with my sisters when we were growing up. And every now and again, when you might want to go out and ride around and look cool through the nighttime, or if you had a date, if it were a special enough occasion, sometimes you'd even wash that car. I remember one time getting an opportunity to wash the car. I was going to go out, and I was going to wash that car, and it was going to be cool. Look, man, that thing was going to be just right. And it was an old beater, but it was going to be fine. And I washed and worked on the outside of that car for a couple, 3 hours. And it was ready to go. I think I may have even waxed it. So, I mean, it was just ready to go. And my mother came outside. And she said, "Are you going to do anything to the inside?" And I said, "Well, I don't have time." And she said, "So you're going to give it a Pharisee car wash. It's going to look nice on the outside, but it's going to be full of trash and dirt and debris on the inside." Matthew chapter 23 and verse number 25. Jesus would make that exact same argument to that multitude and to those disciples who were there with him. You make clean the outside of the cup and the platter, but within are full of extortion and excess. You should clean the inside first, that the outside may be clean also. Whoever I was going out with on that date, or wherever I was going on that day, it would have been a nicer gesture to clean up the inside of the car and go and just sort of hit the high spots on the outside of the car. God is saying to these scribes and Pharisees here that they're hypocrites, because while everything on the outside looks the part, did you hear the problem yet? While everything on the outside looks the part, the inside is filthy. The inside is disgusting. It is stomach turning that they have decided to leave the inside to just fend for itself. He said, you clean the inside first, and the outside will really take care of itself. He goes on in verse number 27 to say, "Woe unto you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites, for you're like unto a whited sepulchre, which indeed appear to be beautiful on the outward, but within are full of dead men's bones and all uncleanliness." Whenever special days were coming up in ancient Egypt or ancient Israel, the Herods would go out to the mausoleums, if you'll allow me to use that term, in those graveyards, and they would be commanded to whitewash the outside of those tombs. They would almost look like beacons of light shining out there. They were so white that they would draw men to them. Notice what Jesus says. You're like a whited sepulchre. You're like a painted tomb. Ooh, they look great. Boy, they look so good on the outside. But the inside's just gross. When the tomb of King Tutankhamun from Egypt was found, his was the first one that we as a society found intact. And I think that's why we know so much about him. He didn't do much as a king. He was, in fact, a child as a king. You know, he may have lived to be 16, 18 years old, but in fact, he was a boy, and there was not much that we learned from him, but we got to see an intact Pharaoh tomb. And they slid that stone away, and they look down and see a gold and lapis blue colored headdress. It's the one you know, the one you see, with the lines on it there like that. It's the greatest treasure we have found. They take that death mask off and they find a sarcophagus, and they begin to unpack it. And as they open it up, they find another one, and then another one, and then another one, and then another one, till they have unpacked 7 sarcophagus of King Tut. Then they find him, and he has on his face a gold overlay. And they dust him off, and they look at how beautiful that overlay is. Then when they take that overlay off, do you know what they find? A dried up, old, decayed person. It's not about what's on the outside. It has always been about what's on the inside. Jesus would say, you look like whited sepulchres. Boy, it looks so great. It looks flashy. It looks eye-catching. It looks almost stunning. And you're full of rotten, decaying flesh. Which do you suppose would be more important to Jesus? Those things on the outside, or those things on the inside? As you and I we look at verse number 28. Even so ye also outwardly appear righteous unto men, but within are full of hypocrisy and iniquity. When he's talking this place, this whited sepulchre, he said it's full of dead men's bones and all uncleanliness. And he said you look righteous on the outside, but on the inside you're full of hypocrisy, wearing different types of masks for different types of people, and iniquity, lawlessness, as if the law of God has no application to you. As if the law of God means nothing to you, but you can simply live and do whatever it is you want to do, however you want to do it, and everyone is going to have to accept it. What a sad statement is made for these men who are trying to lead who are trying to lead the nation of Israel, who God would say, I want them to be led in this direction so that they can know who I am. And what they're really finding out is who their brothers are. Verse 29, woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you build tombs of the prophets. You garnish them, and you say, if we'd been there with our fathers, we wouldn't let them kill the prophets. Friday, we looked at the timeline. That's 5 weeks before Jesus is going to be murdered on that cross. Do you remember what they chanted as if it was a sporting event when Jesus was being held on trial? Crucify him, crucify him, crucify him. As if this was some sort of Super Bowl in the ancient world. It's hard for me to believe that they would not have crucified and have tortured the prophets when they did that to the Son of God. Not just a mouthpiece, This is God in the flesh that they will take and nail to a cross. Some 5 or 6 weeks down the road. And they said, if we'd have been living when our fathers lived, we wouldn't have joined in there with that. Yes, they would have. Why? Because they're going to do it here in just a few moments. You want to avoid being a hypocrite? Know what God's Word says. You want to avoid being a hypocrite? Show what God's Word says. And if you want to avoid being a hypocrite, make sure that you really know God's Word. It needs to be oozing out of us. It needs to be exuding out of us. It needs to be something where someone will look at us, hear us, understand us, and say, there's something different about that person. They don't live the same way I do. They don't do the same things I do. They have a peace about them. They have a tranquility about them. They have a joy about them that's just not seen everywhere. And how's that found? It is only found in the service to our God. And that's where we find ourselves seeing the message of hope.
I invite you back each evening at 7 o'clock Central Time for another look into